phase 2 yesterday with the first session by a massive insight about what graphic designing is and the important aspects we are looking for in that. And with that being said, there was a lot of things which was communicated, which was showcased to us, and an awesome presentation. And we have received amazing feedback, which actually encourages us to go forward in doing such sessions in the future. So thank you so much for that, and thank you so much for the people who had taken the time to apply to enter in the information to give us feedback of how the session went. And looking at the feedback, we know it is amazing that how much of information you guys had captured. And with that being said, we warmly welcome you to this to session number 2 in phase 2. So this, as usual, is an initiative by the Rotaract in Rotaract District 3220 in collaboration with Rotaract Clubs of Colombo Metropolitan, Pearl Island and Velavata. So that being said, for the people who are with us for the first time, I hope not. I hope that you guys were with us yesterday as well. But for the benefit of those who are with us for the first time, this is a 5-way session, of which yesterday was the very first session we did. And then, yeah, sorry about that. So yesterday was the very first session on branding phase 2, which is graphic designing and video editing. As explained yesterday, graphic designing and video editing will be divided into 4 sessions, which is 2 from graphic designing and 2 from video editing. So yesterday we had graphic designing session 1, today is session 2. And then the next year, starting next year, Jan, we're going to have video editing session 1 and 2 as well. In completion of these 4 sessions, we will be having a competition in completion of these 4 sessions. And in the competition, we will see how you had captured the data information which is shared to you, and all the information which has been simmered into your brains. So after this competition, we're going to have an awarding ceremony. But then guys have to remember, you have to attend all these sessions. So session 1, 2, 3, 4, definitely you have to attend. You have to make sure that you put your attendance in so that the organizing committee is able to pick you out. And following that, the awarding ceremony is there. Many more information pertaining to this will be shared with you. And with that being said, guys, again, let me just bring in the ground rules a bit more earlier, because yesterday as we closed in, I think all of you guys switched on your cameras, and it was really, really, really nice. Am I right, Rashmi? I think I think that was really good to see their faces, right?
Yes, it was. Felt a little more real.
So it was more real, and it was a really good experience. So guys, let's have that experience right from the start. So why don't we switch on our cameras and try to interact as much as we can. Yesterday was an amazing session. Everybody was interacting very good. So our only request is keep it up. Just switch on the cameras. And a bit of ground rules is: number 1, switch on your camera. Number 2, be on mute. Maybe our facilitator will be asking whether you guys have any questions. Just unmute yourselves and speak at that time. But let's keep ourselves muted on the other times as the speaker is speaking. With that being said, yeah, as communicated right now, more details about the competition will be shared in the participants groups. So look forward for that as well. So without taking much time, let me hand over the time to Rashmi, and also thanking you for being with us for today as well. And if you guys have any questions during the session, you can use the option to raise your hand so that we would be able to just point out if there is a question that we can share with the facilitator. All right, good, right, cool. Rashmi, all over to you.
Thank you so much, Roy.
No problem.
Hi guys, it's so nice to see you again. To the ones who just joined today, welcome. I'm so glad for you all to be back, as well as the new ones who just joined. So yesterday was kind of the session where I was briefing about the basic principles. I will be touching upon it very faintly over while I do the presentation, but I won't be going too into detail. So this session is more towards how to use Photoshop and almost how do you get started with it. I would also like to mention, if you have any questions, feel completely free to write them in the chat box, and after every session or after every once in a while, I might check it to answer the questions. So let's get started. Let me just share my screen. Can you guys see the screen?
Yep, can see.
Perfect. So like I mentioned earlier, welcome back, guys. I'm so excited to do the second session with y'all. So yesterday, like I mentioned, we kind of spoke about the elements of design as well as the principles of design. And these two things is what makes graphic design what it is. It's the heart and soul of graphic design. So to understand this means the work that you're putting out might be of high quality. So these were the kind of things that we touched upon in yesterday's meeting. Sorry. So let's talk design. So after yesterday's meeting, did you guys maybe see things a little differently? Maybe you were a little more observant about all the design elements around you. Feel free to unmute yourself and share anything if there is. Okay, so after yesterday's presentation, for me at least, it made me really aware of how many people have the same passion as me. And that was really heartwarming, just because we might come from different backgrounds, and yet there's one topic that we all can kind of agree on. And I think even in this meeting, there are about maybe 100 or so people who came to one area for the same reason, and that makes me really happy to share the knowledge that I've gained throughout the years. So for the ones who might have not been here yesterday, hi, I'm Rashmi. I am a creative strategist as well as a graphic designer, and I've been in the creative industry for about 4 years, I would say. I started out as a graphic designer, and I made my way up to a creative strategist. I work for both companies, local as well as global. I've worked with Costa Coffee, Disney. In terms of the local clients, it's been Kiehl's, Ravello, and brands such as that. So I hope that was enough of an introduction for you to know a little bit about me. But the first thing before I even get into Photoshop is I spoke about all the basics yesterday, and I think when you're starting out as a designer or someone who wants to design, one of the hardest questions is, okay, but what is my style? Like, you see so many people with so many different styles of like their different art styles, and yet it's quite hard to figure out which one you like. It's almost as if you'd have imposter syndrome sometimes, and that's it's quite common, right? To not know what style you might lean towards. My style is still changing, to be honest. The way I was designing 3 years ago is nothing compared to what I'm doing now, right? And one of the things to really understand what your style is you need to try out all of the styles. Without a doubt, you have to try them out in order to see what is your like cup of tea, right? And the reason why art movements in this case, so things like Bauhaus or Art Deco and Dadaism and things like that, the reason why it's important is because these art movements in certain point of history has made an impact, and why these art movements have been there. Like, so Dadaism, for example, the reason why that art movement came into being is more of reasons to, they want to throw common sense out of the window, basically, and design in a way nobody has designed, removed all the rules. And it's really interesting once you go through it, right? And it just really helps you to figure out your style once you've gone through all of the art movements as well. So now I would also like to talk to you about softwares as well, because I feel like if somebody told me when I was first starting out, my life would have been so much more easier than kind of figuring out what I need to do. So these are the basic softwares that you might need to get started, right? Depending on what you would want to be designing, there's a software for each thing. So today I'll actually be talking about Photoshop, but you should definitely check out the other softwares mentioned here as well, and how to basically use them, because it'll be really important depending on what your final deliverable is, your final design outcome. So let's begin with Adobe Illustrator, right? So Adobe Illustrator is, it's a vector software. So unlike Photoshop, which is a raster software, it uses raster graphics. So raster graphics it uses tiny little pixels. Hopefully, y'all might know the word pixels as well. It's the tiny little dots that make up your screen, any display. It emits like RGB colors, and it's what makes your devices show color, right? So Photoshop uses these tiny little pixels, while Adobe Illustrator actually uses mathematical equations in order to put a visual out or a graphic out. Which is why if any of y'all have used Photoshop before, if you zoom in, the more you zoom in, the visual you have becomes pixelated. But on Illustrator, you can zoom in and out, and there will be no pixelation whatsoever. You might be hearing a lot of new terms, so feel free to drop them in the chat box if something I said wasn't clear. So pixelation is when your image is basically blurry. And yeah, it's basically when your image is blurry. So Adobe Illustrator, you'd actually use Adobe Illustrator when you want to design a logo, or you need to put an image or an artwork for print, purely because it does not pixelate regardless of how much you zoom in and zoom out, right? And one reason why, again, you should probably design your logos on Adobe Illustrator is because for that reason. When you're designing a logo, you're not just designing it for one piece of artwork. Let's say the logo is for social media. You're not just designing it for that, but you're designing it so it can be printed. It can be sized up and put on a banner. So Adobe Illustrator really is the way to go for that when you need scale as well as quality. And Photoshop is actually one of the first things that people kind of use to get started, just because it's a little more easier compared to Illustrator. But Photoshop, I would say it is good, but it isn't great for print material, just because you need a little more quality, and that pixel issue that I spoke about, that really happens. But Photoshop, it's not too tricky, but it is quite it's quite nerve-wracking to start, I would say, because it's intimidating, right? But you can use Photoshop for any sort of digital posts that you might have, social media posts, any covers. You can use it. I would mainly say for a digital platform, Photoshop is great. Style of taking several images and combining them to be one visual. So again, these are terms that you can note down, and I can refer back to them if there is a confusion. So Adobe InDesign is, so that is mainly used for publication work. So publication work is very text heavy posters, your magazines, basically anything that might need to be printed, or it has a lot of text because it really needs to be aligned, right? So Adobe InDesign is perfect to do that. And you finally have Adobe XD and Figma. So these are UI UX tools, right? They're website developing tools. It's probably not something you should start on right now if you're a beginner to graphic design, but it's definitely something you should play around with. So personally, my favorite tool between the both of them is Figma, purely because there's a collaboration point to it. Not only can I make little like mind maps and write down my work over there, but I can also use it as a website development tool, right? I can create my website designs in it. XD does the same. However, it's just a personal preference as to why I like Figma. So I hope that was clear. Maybe are there any questions that you might want to ask? Okay, so there's one question on the chat box. Could you please tell what Adobe app I can use instead of Procreate? So Procreate, I think Procreate is mainly used for illustrations and things like that, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it is. So for me, what I use is mainly Illustrator to get the overall skeleton of the illustration done. And then I move it to Photoshop with the correct size, just because I can put, but it only supports the iPad. Yes. So that is actually like, I think Procreate is quite good, but it's just, it doesn't have as many features as you could when you switch from Adobe. This is just a personal preference again. When you switch from from Illustrator to Photoshop, you can do so much more, I feel, because I get all of my details and my brush sets from Photoshop, just because there's so many of them. Are there any other questions? You could unmute yourself and ask. Okay, I don't think there's any questions, so I'm going to move on. So is Photoshop complicated? I would say to someone who is just starting out, it's quite intimidating, purely because of how many tools are there and how complicated it is to set up. And there are so many new terms like pixels and things like that. It was really overwhelming even when I started. And the reason why I decided that I might take you through the software is purely because it's easier to understand when someone's explaining something to you and showing you rather than having to figure it out by yourself, right? And it really does help to have someone and point out everything that's going on, and it's a good start basically. And I'm actually hoping you could do the same. So while I'm speaking, I will be designing a little something as well, just so I can speak about the fundamentals. So I do hope that you can open up your Photoshop as well and design along with me. That way, if there are any questions, you can quickly unmute yourself and ask away. That way we're growing together in this journey of you learning Photoshop. Before I actually start, I kind of wanted to talk about what we might be doing. Sometimes, again, it's easier to just jump right into something rather than constantly reading about it. At least that's what I believe. Practice is probably the best way to really improve something. So to just start using the software, you'll eventually learn your fundamentals of design. It's foolproof, I would say, because you have to kind of learn it in order to use the software as well and make compositions. So today's challenge, or what we might be doing today, is we're gonna be designing a poster. So I've chosen a poster because it's one of the most basics. It's the basics of a final outcome, and I thought it might be easier to explain certain things. So what we're going to be doing is we'll be designing a poster dedicated to your favorite object. It could be an object, it could be a piece of furniture, it could be food. I've already chosen mine, so I'll take you through it as well. You can think of a random object as well and just get a image out of the internet and we can work with it, right? So it can be something you own or want, and like just really have fun with the experiment. While I'm explaining as well, just figure out how to use the tools, drop any questions that you might have in the chat box, and we'll just learn through software, learn through Photoshop together, because I think it's much easier that way. Again, before we start this, the thing I spoke about earlier, right, which was your visual style. I think when you're first starting out, again, it's a little tricky, right? So on the screen itself, there are so many different visual styles, and one might attract you a little more than the others. And eventually, even over time, the one you were attracted to is probably not going to be the one you're attracted to in a couple of years, right? It's human nature to like other things eventually. So I just wanted to kind of show you these so you get a small bit of inspiration as well. Again, this is another set of posters I collected. There's so many different things. There's 3D here. There's photo manipulation, the one with the sushi and a lighter. There is this almost paper collage kind of thing right next to it. But it's quite a few styles, right? If you have figured out your style, that's great. But if not, you can just start out completely fresh and pick one style that you might want to go with. So today I'm actually going to be using this vintage style. This is something I am interested in right now. The fact that there's a lot of retro design coming in. It was there in the early 90s. This was a 90s style, basically, mainly because most of it had to be cut up and then scanned and all of that. But now it's actually coming back again, and it's something I will be trying to replicate. Also with this, one other thing that is definitely important when you're looking at other people's work is make sure you're taking inspiration and not actually stealing what they're doing, right? Because this is a habit that we actually do unintentionally. It's so easy to steal other people's artworks without even realizing it. There's a very fine line between inspiration and design. I think there's a quote as well that says good artists steal. And it's mainly because obviously you have to kind of grasp the attention, grasp the knowledge that another designer has and use it in your own way. And that's also something that I kind of want you to learn during this as well. How do you take someone else's work and then get inspired by it? So when we look at these examples, so what I'm technically doing in taking inspiration is I'm looking at how the layouts are. So in these visuals, the layouts are clean, they're balanced, they're symmetrical. So that's something I'm going to keep in mind while designing, right? And the text, the fonts are basically very heavy fonts. And they also use a lot of all caps font, all caps while they're typing it out. So that's another thing I'll keep in mind. And also, although they're talking about the Nike shoes, I will keep in mind that the text has been highlighted more than the rest of it. And this is similar to what, And this is similar to what I was talking about yesterday, right? Hierarchy and emphasis. So even in this first poster, Smokem is actually the hierarchy. It's the emphasis of the poster, right? And in this other one, which says blazer, it says it's in this bright yellow. So it's using emphasis again. So these were the kind of topics that I will be talking about as well when we start designing. Other than that, I noticed that they're using a lot of muted colors. So there's a lot of yellows, a lot of greens, very muted, saturated colors almost. So I'll be using those kinds of things. The next thing is maybe I might bring in some illustrations. So illustrations is something that I am passionate about. So maybe that's how I add my touch into it, right? So without further ado, I think I am going to start with the challenge. So again, just a reminder, we're going to be designing a poster. If you can open up your Photoshops, please do. I would love for you to follow along as I explain through the software, and you can see what I'm talking about as well. So I'll just stop sharing my screen and move on to the Photoshop software. Yeah. Were there any questions until now? Yeah, so someone has commented, good artists copy and great artists steal. So that's the quote I was trying to remember. And it's well said. I don't think I can add anything to it. Are there any questions about anything I spoke about just now regarding the styles or the softwares? You can definitely unmute yourself and ask away. Yes, I will be showing not so much editing. I'm not sure if you can call it editing, because I'm not editing an image, but I will be creating a composition. So I think I'm just going to get started. Hopefully you can see my screen. Give me a second. Okay. So when you are first starting out, there's, I think, a lot of things that's kind of there. Sorry, 1 second, my tools are being covered. Okay, great. Sorry, 1 more second. Yeah, okay, perfect. So when you are first starting out, so getting the software is a little tricky. The correct way would be to purchase the software. However, if you can't, there are places that would install the crack version. It's a little risky to say that, but you know what, it's fine. Like it really is. As long as you get to learn, I'm sure it's okay, right? Hopefully. But if you can download it, it's great. There are also places that will help. If you can purchase it, that'll be even better. That way there are no bugs or glitches when you're using it. But so I think I'm going to start with how to open a file, and as I go, I'm going to talk about the other things. So you have file, edit, image, layer, and all of those are more towards when you're designing. And when you want to open a file, you click new file, and you have a bunch of sizes as well, right? So I'm going to show you the basic sizes, the standard sizes that ideally you would follow. So if this is for digital, you would go with RGB. And if it's for print, you would go with CMYK, I think, yeah. And that is mainly the color profiles. The RGB is for digital and the CMYK is for print. So you have that here as well, right? It's the color mode. And since we are designing for digital, it will be RGB color mode. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a file. So I'm starting out with 1920 pixels in terms of width and 1080 in terms of the height. You also have this thing called orientation, which is basically whether you wanted a portrait or a landscape. In this case, I want it to be a landscape, right? So color mode is the thing I just spoke about, which is the RGB color. You have background contents. Usually you'll get a default version of this. You can just keep it as it is. Most times it won't be an issue unless it's something specific. You can definitely just Google it and you'll get your answers, right? So another thing is make sure that your resolution, the standard resolution is usually 300 pixels per inch. Sometimes it can be 72, like in this frame over here, but the resolution basically decreases the quality of whatever you do. So you want to keep it at a standard of 300, depending on what your final outcome is. And since this is a poster, I think keeping it at 300 would do well. So then you click create, and this is kind of what you have, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to get my object right now. And the object I wanted was, let me try to find it. Yeah. Just copy paste it. So hopefully to the ones who are doing this along with me, hopefully you found an object that you like. If not, you can probably just get a piece of furniture that might be easier to work with, right? Let me see if I can find my image. Okay. So this is my image. It's actually called a roly-poly chair. And it's absolutely fantastic. It's just the shape of it is quite incredible, right? It's so weirdly pleasing to the eye just because of how round it is and the color as well. So what I'm going to do is what I'm currently using right now is my laptop as well as a tablet, just because the tablet is easier for me to kind of move around the objects without having to use a mouse. I never really liked the mouse, to be honest, just because it was a little too controlling. So using a stylus in my tablet was a little easier for me. But I think in this case, it would be whatever works best for you. So I have my object here. And if you remember, I had a certain style that I wanted to do. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to create another layer so I can create my sketch. So the fantastic thing about Photoshop is if you hover over any of the icons, you get what it does. That way you don't have to like kind of fight for like go back as to what it is. So even when you hover over these tools, it shows you everything, right? So before I actually do the artwork, I think I might take you through the basics of this as well. So maybe the first thing can be building shapes. So what you have to do is either left, I think it's left, right? One of the two, because I'm using the stylus, I'm not sure. Okay, yeah, it's the right click. Basically, if you right click the circle or the shape tool, that section, you have a bunch of shapes that you can use, right? So here you have, sorry, give me a second. So here you have the square tool. You have these little dots that you can kind of move around with. A few of the commands, there are also keyboard commands, and trust me, it's going to get a little overwhelming, but please do unmute yourself at any point and ask me about any commands, right? So when I'm on a specific tool, when I click command on Mac and control on Windows, you get your cursor where you can move it around. Because if you plan on moving your object around without pressing command or control, command or control, you might actually miss out on a few things. Yeah. So that's a square. You can also get circles. In this case, again, do it maybe as I'm speaking. So when I want a perfect circle, what I'm doing is I'm pressing Shift. It's Shift for both Mac as well as Windows. So when you click Shift, you can get a circle of any size and have it widen, scale up or down without the shape of it being affected. To undo your action, it's Command Z or Control Z in photo in Windows, if I'm not mistaken. And it's Command Shift Z to get it back, right? And also do keep in mind, I will be sending a keyboard shortcut cheat sheet. That way you can kind of go through it as well if it makes it easier. To also undo, you can go to Edit and click Undo Move, Redo Move. You also get the command, the keyboard, the keys that you have to press in order to do so, right? If this is easier in the beginning, you should definitely do it. It's what I did it when I was first starting out too. Other than that, what else? So this is called the selection tool. So rectangular mark tool, right? So it makes a selection of the shape you want in any area. So people mainly use this tool to cut out certain objects. Like if I wanted to cut out this circle, since it is a shape right now, I have to rasterize the layer so it becomes an image rather than a shape. I would put the square where I want to, and I would click Command X in order to cut the shape out, right? And it might sound a little complicated, so please do unmute yourself and ask any questions, or if I was speaking too quickly, please do go ahead and ask, right? Other than that, oh, and you can also delete any layers by just clicking backspace or delete on your laptops. Makes it much easier as well. This is the Polygon, the Polygon lasso tool. And I'm just explaining through the basics, right? You could go to in-depth scenarios with Photoshop. I also have a bunch of links for those too. So it might help you out a little bit if just because I can't talk about everything right now, just the basics of what we might be needing for today. So that basically gives you the freedom to kind of draw any shape you want. Even again, I'm repeating the same action. You rasterize your layer, Command X, and you get to cut the shape out. So it creates a sort of negative space in between the shape. So I'm just going to undo that, which is Command Z. And when you do this, if you see, I'm not pressing any keys right now, and if I go to move it, it moves, right? So what you can also do is if you want to move the shape around to that corner, this corner, you have the freedom to, and it'll all make sense when you kind of experiment with the software on your own. You can't really go wrong with playing around with the software, right? Another keyboard shortcut would be Command D, which deselects the little line you made. So whenever you make this, whenever you make a border, whenever you make a selection, basically, if you're not happy with the selection, you just have to click Command D, and the selection will go away. Another thing is this magic wand tool. As you can see, there's a little animation as well on the software itself. It selects an area based on its color, right? So in this case, let me just quickly make up a random composition just so it makes a little more sense. Okay. And I'm just going to merge these layers together because I want it to be one layer. So again, with these layers over here, it's usually what exactly is above one another. So if this, hopefully it makes sense, yeah. If this is your visual, your back layer is your background, as you can see on the screen, and slowly I am building up my layers. So ideally, if you want to merge things, you should. But a normal rule of thumb is that you just label your layers really well, and that way you can navigate through them. So now that I have this selected, you can kind of see that it's one shape, right? And suddenly I decide I don't like the red and I want to remove it. So what I do is, even instead of using this polygon tool to mark each specific area, what I would just do for the ease of editing is, and the ease of reducing the amount of time you're spending on things, I would just select that specific area, click Command X, and it would just remove that area out for me completely. But one of the tricky things is, usually it's not noticeable until you zoom in, is it might actually leave a border around it. In this case, it was a really clean cut just because of the size of the artboard. But sometimes you might risk getting a little line of red. I think it's over. Yeah, if you can see over here, there's a faint bit of red. And also the dots you're currently seeing on the screen are pixels, the thing I was talking about earlier. So that's what makes up your artworks, basically. So yeah, other than that, there are a bunch of other things as well, but I'm just talking about the basics right now. This is your pen tool. If I wanted to trace over an image, it's honestly, the pen tool is what I hated the pen tool, to be honest. I despise the pen tool. But I do like using it in the case I need to trace over something. So I'll actually show you that while I'm working with my object as well. Other than that is your type tool. It gives you your text, and you have a little panel over here that talks about the properties. It also shows you what exactly is happening. I'm so sorry I can't get to too much of detail, otherwise it might just get you confused about the platform. Another thing is basically, let me see. Yeah, I think that covers the basics. This is your sketch tool. So one other thing, right now I have a stylus, which is why I can go from really thin lines to really thick lines. I think if you want to do that in terms of drawing an illustration, you might actually need to get a tablet in order to do so. So I think I'm going to start with the composition, right? So before I start, is anyone actually doing this along with me, or are y'all watching? Anybody?
Hi.
Hi, yes.
We were actually watching, just taking it all in.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah.
Is anyone actually doing it, or just because I think it might be easier for me to understand if, okay, so I think most of y'all, yeah, most of y'all are watching it, which is completely fine. One of you're doing it. That's great. Yeah, that's great.
Sorry, could you repeat that, please? I wasn't able to hear you properly.
Sorry. Oh, I just asked if anybody was doing this along with me.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, no
I'm
worries.
watching this.
So one thing I would also like to mention, I think it's really important to mention, is a lot of times, especially when you're starting out, there might be one way you do it, right? And another person might do it in a different way. And that's completely fine. There's no wrong way or right way. It's just whatever is easier for you is what you end up using, because these tools are really complicated, right? There's no one way to do something in any software you're using. So whether it's the method that I'm doing that you're taking in, or whether it's the method that you saw on YouTube, that's completely fine. Just use whatever makes sense for you and whatever is easy. I think that's the best advice I can give you as you start out, right? Because there's so many ways of doing certain things, right? So I think I'm just going to get started right now. So here is my object, as you all saw. Hopefully you all can see the screen as well. What I'm actually gonna do right now is just simply label my object, just because I don't want to miss out on it. And I'm going to create another layer. So what I'm going to do on this layer is I'm just going to build up a rough sketch of how I might want my illustration to look, basically, right? Go to sketch. I'm just going to lock my object. That way, when I'm clicking on it, it doesn't let me like touch it at all. That way it stays where it wants to. So here on my sketch layer, I'm actually just going to roughly sketch this out. Please ignore the really bad illustration of it. And I know I want this to be my highlight, but the text should also look really visible. So I'm actually just going to call it the roly-poly chair. Just going to keep it as roly-poly. And also, maybe I want some side information over here and here. I think that might be a good of a layout. So if, by the way, this I button over here, what it does is it hides the layer that you want to hide, right? Indicates the layer visibility. So I'm just removing that so I can get an overall idea of what the composition might look like. I know I want to keep it clean and minimalistic purely because that's the style that I'm going for. It's the inspiration that I saw. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm just going to get started. I will move my sketch down. I might also reduce the opacity. I spoke about opacity yesterday. It's how visible your blacks are. And I'll just keep it at 7 because I don't want to rely too much on the sketch. It was just for me to get an idea. So for the object, I know there's a lot of texture in the kind of inspiration that I was looking at. So what I am going to do is, sorry, give me a second, need to hide. Yeah. What I'm going to do is I will take my object. I will rasterize the image just so I can work on it a little more freely. One other thing that is really important is I'll actually show you now. If your object is, there's something called a smart object, right? And that is when you get this little smart object icon thing, and it makes sure like that you can't edit on your image. So if I were to make a copy of that, and if I were to actually rasterize the image, so I'm taking it out of a smart object, and if I reduce the size, so to actually reduce the size, it's Command T, and I scale it down, and I click enter, it's smaller. However, since it wasn't a smart object, if I scale it back up to what the size it was, you can notice it's a little more blurry compared to the one here. So when you're working with images, and this is purely because it's a raster software, it's made by pixels. So it messes up how it is all the time. It messes up how the quality of your images are all the time. So if I were to increase and decrease the size over here, there'd be no issue whatsoever. Sorry, guys, give me a second. Just plugging my charger in. Perfect. So I'm just going to delete this object that I made over here and focus on the one that's a smart object. So I know I want to add some texture into it, right? It might make a little more sense to, because right now it's a little plain. So what I will just do is just want to increase the size a little more. That is Command T, increase the size. Going to make a copy of it, which is Command C. Just shifted it to the side, and I'm going to rasterize the layer again, and I'm going to create the texture, right? So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go to filters. So I want to make it a little noisy. So I don't know if you've heard the word noise, but even on Instagram, when you have the option to edit your image, there's this word called noise. It adds these little dots to your image just to make it look a little more vintage. Makes it look a little more old, to be honest, which is what we're trying to get over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to blur. This is a filter, blur, and then Gaussian blur. So what Gaussian blur is what it technically does is, if you can see what's happening on the screen, the more I increase the radius, the more blurry it becomes, but the less I keep it, the less blurry it becomes, right? And the reason why I'm doing this is because I want to create some sort of effect. So I'm actually just going to keep it at around 5.2 maybe. Yeah, 5.2 looks good. So you see the difference between the original image as well as the copy I made of it. What I'm also going to do is I am going to add an adjustment. So an adjustment is basically you can do anything to your images using an adjustment. In this case, I'm going to go to threshold. So this is what it does. It basically simplifies or oh, sorry, forgot a step. I forgot to add the noise. Okay, so noise. Over here, again, if you can see, this is what noise is basically. It's a bunch of black and white dots that make up your image. The less I put, the less noisy it becomes. So in this case, I'm actually going to keep it at around 28.33. The distribution is Gaussian, which means that it's distributed in a way that is quite constant. And if you can see, uniform, although it's constant, Gaussian gives more of a blur to it, right? It's a little more unpredictable in terms of how it spreads. While uniform is nice, I've always been someone who preferred Gaussian blur, Gaussian noise. And monochromatic is just so that my dots are black and white rather than RGB, which, as you can see on the screen right now. So I'm just going to keep it monochromatic, which is black and white. I think that much noise is enough. So I'm going to click OK. And now I come to the step of going through the threshold. So this is image adjustments. You can also access your adjustments through this panel over here. If you don't have these panels, what you can do is go to Windows, Workspace, and Essentials default. You will automatically get these panels, because I know sometimes the software opens without anything and it's like, whoa, where did everything go? But that's how you get it: Windows, Workspace, Essentials. So here I'm just going to play with the threshold. So So as you can see here, I've also selected my object, which is, if you click Command and click on the image or the layer of it, you select the thing. I'm going to go to threshold, image adjustments, threshold, and I'm just going to work with how many blacks that I want on the screen. So the more threshold I have means the more black there is, and the less I have means the more white there is, right? So I think this shows a good amount of contrast. Contrast is again one of the terms we spoke about yesterday, which means to be able to differentiate things. And it also does a really nice job in kind of showing shapes and showing movement, right? So after I do that, I think I'm going to go over here and I'm going to click screen. So if you can see, this is what the layer looks like when it's normal. These are also just features of how you want the layer to act, right? Dissolve basically makes it a little more softer. Darken intensifies the blacks. Multiply also acts in the same way. But in this case, we kind of want it to be a little more lighter. So we're going to go for screen. And what I'm going to do then is actually reduce the opacity just a little, just so that I have a small amount of dots, not to the point it's too obvious, but to the point it makes sense to what I'm seeing and what my inspiration was. What I'm also going to do is actually add a layer of contrast just to the original object, right? Just so there's more definition. So also, again, when you're working with layers, make sure, one, you label it. I can't tell you the importance of labeling because once you start working, you'll get like 20 layers at least, and it's insane to kind of go through each and every layer to kind of figure out what you're searching for, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to click the original object. I will go to my adjustments, and I'm going to click brightness and contrast. So what I want to do is I want to see if I can get it to how I want it to get. I want it to be a little more dull, so I'll reduce the brightness. I'll play around with the contrast until it comes to an area I like, and this is something that I'm okay with. Sometimes this depends on how you might want to use your layers. If I'm genuinely happy with what something looks like, I just merge the adjustment that you've put with the original image, purely because I don't want a lot of layers while I'm working, right? In this case, I'm again going to do so. I'm just going to convert both of them into a smart object. And again, don't forget to relabel the your layers. One other thing in this layer panel, if I actually move your layers, like I said, it's literal layers, so you got to be mindful of where you keep things. If I move this object layer down, my dots, my texture completely goes away. So it's quite important for me to keep it above the original image. So once I have that, I'm kind of happy with that. One other great thing about Photoshop is it gives you guides. These little pink lines are kind of telling me where it's going. Another thing you can do is press Command R and you get your rulers on the side. So if I click it and I kind of want to find the center, it automatically centers it, right? If I want to find the horizontal center, it automatically finds it. Another key in order to remove your rulers is, if you want to see the image without it, is Command and semicolon. Command and semicolon for it to show again. In this case, I don't think I want to work with them, just because I'm designing a little more freely. Next, what I think I'll do is I'll actually add the font that I want to. You can obviously increase the size from your font panel or this panel above here. Much easier to use the panel above. And I'm actually going to go through a bunch of fonts. So I think if you remember in the inspiration that I saw, they also used something like this. but I'm just going to see if there's something else that might seem more interesting. Something that might stand out. Oh, this is kind of funky. Makes it look a little out of this world, to be honest. It makes it look a little fancy. Is that the vibe we're going for? I'm not sure. So maybe we'll go back to it and look at other fonts. So this is a serif font. I spoke about it yesterday as well. This would be a decorative font. These are serif fonts again, but it's more slab serif, another term that you could probably look up. These are your sans serif fonts. So I'm actually gonna stick to Futura, maybe bold. No, too bold. I think let's do condensed extra bold. I like how much it's popping. Also, do keep in mind, I'm just zooming in. You can press Z to zoom in, and to zoom out, it's Z option, or in Windows, it's I think it's Z Alt, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, I'm just zooming in using my trackpad actually, but just because that's how I usually work. So I'm just going to show you something about color, right? So in this case, it's a black, but it's towards the blue spectrum. But if I move it towards this warmer hue, you can see the difference. Hopefully you can see the difference it makes, right? I'll also just split my screen if that's quite easy, right? So when you look at this side, it feels a little more balanced just because there's a warmer and a cold color acting together. But in this case, it seems a little warmer than usual, I would say. So I actually think I like the way the cool tone is acting with the warm tone. So what I'm going to do is write roly poly over here. I'm gonna space it out, and I kind of want the text interacting with the object. So I'm just going to increase the size. So when that happens, you need to fix this thing over here, which is the leading, the space between the two texts, right? Currently, it is centered. I think that's quite good. I'm going to see how I want to place it. I might want it to be spaced out a little more. Does that work? Oh, too far. So this, what I'm doing over here is I'm actually fixing the kerning. I want to see if there's an easier way to place this. I'm actually not a fan of the condensed font. I think I might just go for the bold font I was using earlier. And that's the thing about while you're designing, right? You'll constantly change your mind while you design, and that's completely fine. Purely because you're making decisions in your head and kind of seeing what works, what doesn't. And that's completely okay to do so and be indecisive, because at some point you will finally figure it out, right? So what I'm actually gonna do here now is I want the text to kind of go in and out the object. So I'm going to rasterize my type because I want to be able to edit on it. I might select my object, and I'm going to see where the blacks kind of intersect between. And in this case, I'm just going to take my eraser tool just because it's so much more easier for me since I'm using a tab. And I'm just going to wipe off the areas I don't want to show. In this case, I also want to wipe off here. I want to leave those as it is. I want this to look like it's hidden. So I'm just going to edit that. Over here, it might be a little more tricky. I will get to that later. I'll just do the easier ones first. And here as well, right? Now let's get to this little tricky O that's interacting. So I just reduced my layer to see what's going on
Hi,
under.
ma'am.
Yeah, go for it. Hi.
Ma'am, how did you get that warm look for the text?
Warm look for the text.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Give me a second. So, so the warm look is purely on your colors, right? So I'm not someone who likes using black, a full pure black. I always prefer, so this is a full pure black. If you can see the screen over here, the hex code for it is 000. It means it's using all its might to be the purest of purest blacks. What I like doing is I like using a dark version of a gray that almost looks black purely because it's easier for the eye, right? And in this case, when I want a warmer black, what I do is I go to this orange or yellow spectrum and I play around in this section where it almost turns black, but it's not completely black. And that's what I kind of do to get a warmer text. In the current one I'm using though, I'm using a cooler tone just because it makes more sense for the design I'm trying to do. And hope that answered your question. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to come back over here. And I kind of see the outline I want to follow. So you could use the eraser tool for this, or you could actually use your Polygon lasso tool to kind of get a rough idea of how it might cut. So maybe it actually starts somewhere from here. Or maybe it's just straight down in the center. Also just play around with it because you need to see what makes sense while you're doing it. Like right now it looks weird, right? It looks unrealistic. But as soon as I increase this, maybe, yeah, as soon as I just bring that up, even though the leg of the chair doesn't start there, it starts to make a little more sense. So now when I look at it, I'm actually quite happy with the way it is. It says roly-poly. And now what I want to do is I actually want to bring in a background to kind of tie it in together. So what I just did is I unlocked my background tool. I'm going to go to edit, fill. From that, I will go to color. You get this little box, and then you'll be able to pick the color it is. This is the way I've kind of do it. But you have an option over here as well, which is so much more easier actually. But it's this circle with the white and black. You click solid color, and you can instantly fill a color. This is actually the easiest way rather than the way I said earlier. So I'm just going to pick a color. I actually kind of like the way this looks, the fact that it's like a little monochromatic. I think we might go for, yeah, why not? We can just go for something of, no, too dark. Maybe something of this sort. Looks interesting, not interesting enough. No, you know what? Sorry, I see that's actually me getting derailed. So my inspiration technically said clean white backgrounds. You can go further to experiment that way, but I think I'm just going to stick with a beautiful, slightly tinted yellow, orange background. So that is my color tool. So that's actually an easier way to add in colors just because you can repick your color if you want to. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to add a texture because I've been working with textures. So I'll go to this gradient tool over here. I will pick the kind of gradient that I want. I know I want it to be similar to this. And if I just shrink down the screen and drag to one area, I get the gradient that I want, right? So I want a slightly less gradient on both sides and not the sides and not the bottom. So I make the gradient that I want. I go to noise and you can see there's already a blur. So I go to noise, I increase or decrease as I need, reduce it a little more. But you instantly see how the artwork is slowly being transformed, right? By just very few steps of certain features. Yeah, I think another tool is this tool, which kind of expands from out to in. But in this case, I kind of want to be more, I want to be able to actually make my own gradient, just so I have more control over it. And I just want the top section. So I'm just going to do the same thing, reduce the opacity a little. And yeah, so that kind of works for me. Is there anything more that I can do? Certainly, I can actually just add individual, oopsies, sorry. I can actually add individual gradients to these. If I pick my, so it looks like it's beneath something. If I click the magic tool and I select the ones that I want the gradient in, obviously I have to change my foreground color, probably to the blackest black, since we're working with the dark color. And if you notice, instantly there's a gradient over it, right? So what I'm actually going to do is also create another layer. Make sure you're constantly working in layers, because it's so much more easier to delete and add things that you want to. So that's the kind of texture I want, right? I'm just going to lower it a little so it's not too prominent. And I would usually do the same for all of it, but in the case of time, I am not that fortunate to do everything. So I just wanted to show you kind of an example of it. I'm just going to try finishing up as much as I can. And as you can see, it's kind of happening for all of them right now. I know I'm working a little fast, but please feel free to ask me any questions while I do this if it hasn't been clear so far. Are there any questions, maybe? Any clarifications? Please feel free to switch on your mics and ask away. Any? Hi, yes.
Can you show how you erase the letters a bit once again?
Of course. Okay, so let's say, so now we know that this is my main text, right? Main text. This is my shadow for the main text. I'm just going to click my main text layer. You can either take your eraser tool or your polygon tool, anything that basically makes a selection. And you're just going to, with the eraser tool, you're just wiping off whatever you want to, right? With the polygon tool, you have to be a little more precise as to what you want to edit out. So what you can do here is make the selection and then just click delete or backspace, and it will happen instantly. So I hope that kind of answered your question. Are there any more questions maybe? Please feel free to switch on your mic. So as you can see, I'm just adding the texture. One of my biggest pet peeves is just leaving things without finishing them. So I'm just trying to finish as much as I can with this poster. So actually all done.
Hello.
Yes, Oscar.
Can you explain me again how did you put the noise effect or the chair one?
Yeah, of course. So let's say I'm just gonna make a copy of my chair again. This is my object. I will make a copy of it. I will rasterize the layer so I can work with it. And once that is done, I am just going to go to filter Gaussian blur from blur. I'll put it to about this radius. Once that's done, I will go to the same filter, add the noise. I think this was the amount I used, so maybe we might decrease it just to see. Then I will go to threshold threshold. Also, don't forget to select your object, which is command. And then I will click threshold and I will play around with the amounts of blacks that are there. That seems about okay to me. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the layer, reduce the opacity. In this case, since we used a darker, a more intense threshold, which is why you're seeing it the way you're seeing it, right? So in that case, that's basically the steps you take. You can definitely play around with it as well. So it might be easier for you to understand. Hope that helped.
Oh yeah, okay.
Basically, so if this was, let me just lock my background layer without, otherwise you saw what just happened. Oh, still went away. So if you don't actually move it, if you don't actually lock it, that could happen, and it's sometimes very annoying. But what you could also do is just create a group, which is you select all of the layers you want, which is shift. So you select the first one and the last one, and you click this little fold over here and you create a group. And I'm just going to call it BG, which is my background. And as you know, all the layers in that is locked, so I can only move whatever is unlocked. Right now, as I'm looking at it, it looks quite good. It's almost similar to the example I had. What I might also do is, for now, I will just add some rough text. So this is lorem ipsum text. But I do want the weight of it to be, I want it to be a little less intense. So what I'm actually going to do is take the same blue I used, but make it a little more gray. And just going to reduce the size of the text. Yeah. I will also just copy some placement text. Give me a second. So placement text is the lorem ipsum text that I was talking about. So that kind of lets you place text without actually having text. So I'm actually right now, I'm just taking a generator that uses the same kind of, it gives me a random text. Yeah, so what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna copy paste it over there. I know I want it to be small and in this area, right? So right now it's actually massive, so I'm going to decrease the size to maybe 15, still too big, maybe 9. Still too big. Oh, yeah. And I'll reduce the space between all of the text. I also want to left align it just so it's more, it's a little more cleaner, because what we noticed is that it was clean text. I will also just change my font to something that's a little more lighter, but still has the same feeling. I'm just making it sentence case text. So now I feel like it's a little too small, so I'm just going to increase it to maybe 6. Yeah, still feels like too much text. So I might want to just lay that out here, or maybe even here. But I hope that kind of made you understand how to use your tools. At the end of the day, there'd be so much more that I would do with this, but I just wanted you to get an idea of all of this, right? Purely because it just does make it easier to understand. And I think what I would say is basically, don't be afraid of using the software, purely because it seems like you need to have a lot of knowledge, but it's just a matter of kind of figuring out how to use how to use the software, and you'll be completely fine. So this is the most basic of basic things that I could actually show you today regarding the time that I had. But yeah, I hope you kind of got at least a small idea of the platform, which gives you a push to actually like start on your own, which I'm sure you can, regardless of what skill you're in. I'm actually just going to go back to my slides again, just so you get the brief again and see the example that I showed and then my version of it. Let me just make a screenshot. Give me a second. And this is purely to show you how I took the inspiration and made it to what it is right now. There can be so much more work done for it though. However, this is what I could do within this time. So this is the inspiration I had, and this is the final one. So if you can see, there's a lot of similarities, but I didn't let it kind of restrict me. I played with my own colors. I added a lot more texture. While these look a little more cold, this is so much more warmer. And these are the kind of things that you can really like experiment with, right? Because nobody's really stopping you. And I really hope that was helpful, purely because it's quite difficult to get started, to be honest, but I think this might make it a little easier, hopefully. But yes, that was a rough introduction to the platform. Hopefully it was enough to kind of get you started. I really do hope so. What I'm also actually doing is I'm actually compiling a list of resources for y'all, just so it's so much more easier for you to kind of refer to when you have this competition as well. I'm putting down links to almost everything. What you could do also is, if you feel free to follow me on Instagram, actually, because I give quite a lot of advice on design stuff there as well. So I really do hope that this was good for you in order to understand what a wonderful world graphic design is and how you could be part of it. Thank you so much, guys. I'm just going to go into questions right now. Are there any questions?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you differentiate the rasterize and the smart object?
Rasterize and smart object. Okay, so smart object is basically, it's like the example I showed you. I can actually quickly show you now also, might be easier to understand. But smart object actually allows you to move around to shrink it down, to shrink it back up and not lose the quality that it has. But if your image is rasterized, which is rasterized layer, if I shrink it back down and then back up again, there's a quality change. So this really does help. But when you're working with this specific image, and this comes into photo manipulation, right? It might actually be beneficial to rasterize your image, just because you can work with your images more freely. I can just take the eraser and wipe off certain things. It's just so much more easier. Hope that answers your question. Is there anyone else?
Hello.
Hi.
Please can you show again that how did the gradient add the background without adding to the middle?
Oh yeah, of course. So let me just go to my background and remove that texture. So right now I have a plain texture. What I did was I wanted to create another layer so I can add my texture. And it's this tool over here. So if you can see above here, you have the middle the one that starts the gradient from the middle. You have the one that starts it from the corners. So that's the one you ideally need to select. So if I want my gradient only on these two corners, I'm just going to make my gradient, add my noise, and then reduce it just slightly so it's visible but not visible at the same time. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, thank you.
No worries. Is there anything? Okay, so there's one question. How do you crop a part of your object? What I like to do is, for me, this is easier. There might be another way to do it. Let's say I don't want this leg over here. I would actually just go above the shape, and this is easier for me because I feel like I'm using a tablet and a stylus. But feel free to use anything that might be more comfortable, right? Yes, so that's, you could also just cut it like that, but it won't give you a clean line. There is also, I think that's about it. You could also create like a shape, maybe, like if I create a shape on another section and I select that section. Oops, select that section. I could just cut that out just like that. But the easiest way would be, I think the easiest way is the Polygon tool. You can also use the pen tool. It's not something I enjoy using, so try as you go. Just because the pen tool is a little more complicated for my liking, and I like using my stylus. You will get cleaner lines with the pen tool though. Will you customize customize brushes? That's actually something I can't cover in this session, but it's something that I was planning on doing on my Instagram page. So maybe you can check that out in case it helps. Because and also you can just YouTube it actually. There's so many tutorials on how to, that's the lucky part about like being a designer in this current year, like being a designer right now, is that you have so many tools to actually educate yourself on how to do these things, and you can just Google your issue. And I think it might give you an answer, but if not, you can definitely reach out to me on Instagram and just ask away. But yeah, is there anything else that you might want to ask? Anybody? Oh, sorry.
Hello.
Hi, yes.
Miss, could you just recap about what was said before the Photoshop was started? The program before you opened it. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Let me just share my screen. Okay. So I'm just going to, I don't really need to save that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to new file. I'm going to select the kind of artboard you want. You also have suggestions over here, A4, for example. You have the option to work in millimeters or pixels. I prefer pixels because I know the exact size I'm getting at. So in this case, I want it to be 180 and 190. I want it to be horizontal, so I chose the orientation. Color mode is usually RGB for digital and CMYK for print, but I would recommend doing any print work on Illustrator, unless you really have to use Photoshop. Then just make sure you're putting the right pixel size or the right size of the printout you want to take. If it's an A4 printout, make sure you're putting centimeters in the exact A4 measurement, and then work on that. But yes, and then you click create, and you technically have the screen that you want. Is there anything else? So what is my Instagram username? So it is Radical Soul Designs. I will also maybe share a link if that's easier. And yeah, please feel free to actually like DM me on Instagram. I love talking about design, so I'd be open to asking or answering any questions anytime. But yeah, thank you so much, guys. It was so nice to have you all here. I really hope that was helpful for you all. Thank you so much.
Excuse me,
Oh, yes, yes.
ma'am, would it be possible to get the recording to this session?
Roy, I think that might be a question for you.
Okay. I think it would be possible, but just let's just see what the organizing team has to say about that.
Also, if the recording isn't there, like I mentioned earlier, you can just YouTube it, to be honest. That's what I did for most of my university years. If I didn't have an answer to something, I just honestly just YouTube it. You have everything there, without a doubt.
Right. So, okay, so let's see if we can get an update. But I think you guys would be added on to a certain group hiking on WhatsApp. So I think whatever information would be shared would be circulated through there. Yes, actually, yes, that's a big yes. Recordings will be shared. So no worries about that. Cool. So yep. So thank you so much, Rashmi, for the entire breakdown of the entire designing as well as the Photoshop and the Adobe information which was shared. It was really eye-opening. And I think this is gonna be a founding step for everybody here who is trying to move in that avenue. And with that being said, guys, as yesterday, there is a sheet, a Google sheet, which has been shared on the group. And with that being said, we want you guys to go to that link, mark your attendance as said earlier. This session, the session before, and the 2 sessions which is going to happen would be very critical for everybody to be part of and to gain all the information you need to be part of the competition which is coming on later on in the sense after the 2 sessions are to be done. So with that being said, just as yesterday, we are planning to take another photograph. So again, requests are to switch on those cameras and give the best pose you can so that the organizing team could take that photograph for us. Yes, so let's just wait. The cameras are switching on at the moment. Right. Let's just hold on for a minute. Okay. So I think, all right, we have some more. All right, guys, I know there are more of us and I know we can switch it on. So let's do that. All right, so let me do a countdown and maybe the organizing committee could go forward in taking the pictures. Guys, keep on posing for a while because there are 5 slides, 5 windows for the team to go forward. So let's just start with 1, 2, 3. All right. Cool. Stuck in the same post for about 3, 4, actually 10, 15 seconds is the best thing you can do. So with that being said, guys, thank you so much. First of all, let me thank the woman of the hour, Ms. Rashmi. Thank you so much. It has been a big session. Obviously, it is not easy to learn it in a day, but then thank you so much for drilling it down into simple terms so that we'll be able to gain it, understand it well. And I know with the short period of time, you did the best you could. And heartfully, we appreciate it. Thank you so much for being part of this. And with that being said, guys, always just be in touch with the entire team. I mean, there are 2 sessions which is supposed to come. So guys, go to the link once again. If you have not marked your attendance, mark it so that you are marking yourselves to be available for the competition as well. So marking is very important, as I said earlier. And with that being said, we will wrap up this session on graphic designing. And once again, thank you so much for joining, everybody. I know it's been a while, but a very good time for us to study, to learn about something new. With that being said, thank you so much, as well as let me conclude by quoting one more quote on designing. So this is by Brendan Dawes. So she says, or he says, the difference between art and design is that design is all about answers and art is all about questions. So let's keep on designing, and let's keep on giving those questions to other people and showcasing our talent. And with that being said, thank you so much for joining in, and stay tuned for our next updates on the next sessions, which is about to be held in January. And with that being said, my name is Roy John, signing out for today.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So much, Rotaract and Rashmi. Thank you so much. It's been really nice. It's been really nice.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Thanks,
so
guys.
much, ma'am.
Good
Thank you,
timing.
ma'am.
Power cut.
It must be the power cut, right?
So
Thank
I
you so
mean,
much, guys. Thank you, Roy.
Nice work,
no
Rotaract.
problem.
Nice work.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.